Did everybody get something to drink that wanted something to drink? We have 2 types of beer, we have wine, there's Coke Zero. Did you get a Coke Zero?
I will get one before I leave. I probably should not
so.
have one this
All
late.
right.
The caffeine
And we have a
I like
water
Coke
fountain
Zero,
down at
but
the other end of
caffeine
the church,
would get
so.
me tonight.
They have a Coke Zero that has
Let
zero
me-
caffeine.
I'm gonna grab a beer, and I'll be right there, and then we'll get started.
Sounds great.
Hey,
Just
Bruce.
a minute.
Not sugar water.
See, it's gonna be warm in there.
He's gonna walk around right here.
What is it?
She teaches English as a second language to adults.
Okay.
So she works 1 night a week on Thursday nights, and it is like some. She's not even teaching.
Actually,
She's
it's
like
wrong.
registering
Choose
students.
party. Yeah.
Okay.
So
It was a church.
she
Is she at Bowie or?
she Alta Vista.
Oh, okay, they
Yeah.
have it out there?
That was a
It's
very
their
casual
adults. That's kind of
Alta
what
Vista, I think, that's the one on South,
AA
South 11.
Yes, I
South
think so.
11, yes.
I think so.
I was
We were in
thinking
the
that
same
was Bowie.
shoes. I was seeing if we were in the same shoes. Not
Merrill,
Yes.
real close.
All right, well, I think we're gonna get started, and this is a little unusual for us, but, because we don't normally meet in our church, but this is the best place if we want to project things, because our other venue, I don't think would have been very good for that. We can decide after tonight whether we like this venue better or not, but for now, we're glad to be here. So, this is a second part of a 4-part series on Christianity and the arts. Last month, we did Christianity and poetry, and Jen kind of walked us through some thoughts about poetry and did some readings, and we had some discussion about poetry. This month, we are going to talk about visual arts. And so if you haven't met him already, Dan McGregor, professor of art up in ACU land. And how long have you been there now?
like 20-something years.
Oh, gosh, yeah. Well, time flies.
SCAD graduate, right?
A Scaduate, yes, I am.
Dan is, in addition to being a professor at ACU, also a very talented artist in his own right. And if you ever get a chance to see his work on Facebook or in person, he does really good work. So.
But no book. Well, actually, that's what I was about. I have not had a book published like Jen, but actually, I have. So no.
You have.
I have
And you've got lots of commissioned work that is kind of showing up in different places as well. So I can't remember what year Dan and I met, but it's been 7 years or more.
Yeah,
It's been, 7, 8 years. And I count him as a dear friend, and I really appreciate your willingness to do this.
Sure.
You know, he gets tapped to do this kind of stuff a lot, I think, in
He gets
churches,
tapped?
and so, yeah. Tapped at Theology on tap, absolutely,
Nice.
yeah. So, I gave Dan free reign to do whatever he wants, so I can't vouch for anything, but we're gonna turn it over to
And
Dan,
I'm sorry,
all
I'm
right?
sorry. I'm the
So-
reason that we are not in like if you're like I really want to be at a place with like pub atmosphere. I'm sorry, it's my fault.
We're fine.
No, this is
Projection
good.
business.
This is good.
So I've kind of adapted some stuff. I feel like I should say. I've adapted some stuff that I usually present at a Church of Christ ministers retreat. So I'm assuming that as Anglicans or Anglican adjacent people, I don't have to do things like talk y'all into like visual art being okay in church because you're already there, right? Which, if you know anything about churches of Christ, we are not the best in terms of bringing aesthetics into our worship services. But I am interested in hearing from y'all on this question. Just thinking about, you can answer this sort of any direction you want in terms of your own experiences in church or your personal devotional life or what you know about church history. Here's the question. What are some of the roles that visual art either currently plays or has played in the Christian faith? It's a wide open question. So, go.
Well, back in the day when a lot of people couldn't read, they would have the stained glass windows to illustrate the Bible stories, right?
That's exactly right. They sometimes call churches Bibles of the poor, and sculptures as well, telling the stories from Scripture. Because what language is the Mass in the Middle Ages? Latin, and common people can't understand. So the way they learn about the Bible is through visual art. So for a long time, it's had a didactic role in the Christian faith. Great. What else? What are some icons? Absolutely, which is a very specific kind of visual devotional strain from the Eastern Orthodox Church. Absolutely. And of course, icons feature in both public and private worship and devotion. What else? How about y'all? What has y'all's experiences been like?
Flannel board.
Flannel.
Does
Yeah.
that count as visual art? Yeah.
Oh, you'll see. You'll see. Maybe we'll see some of that tonight. If I were really an epic teacher, I would actually have flannel graph of things that I teach, and I do it for my students, none of whom know who that is. Yes, and that's usually used for kids, right? At least that was my experience.
So does this include audiovisual, as in film, or are you really keeping it static art?
I was thinking the tradition of static art, but I'm happy to hear about film too.
Yeah, we'll do VeggieTales next time.
Yeah, I mean, there's the tradition of. I mean, are y'all doing, is film gonna be number 4?
No, we're, music is next, and then actually, Greg Schneller and Larry Fink are gonna do photography and
Cool.
photography, psychology, and the Christian faith, or something
yeah.
like
Yeah,
that.
sounds great. Okay.
But if anybody wants to do film, if you can find somebody that can do film, we'll add a 5th.
That sounds really.
We'll keep this thing going as long
When's
as we
Trey
can.
coming back?
I heard there's a
Yeah.
course at McMurray.
Yeah, I am teaching a faith and film class next spring, so,
I didn't know that.
but I'm not planning to do a theology on that.
Do a dry run.
Yeah.
Anything else I can think of? Just brainstorming.
I remember reading children's Bible storybooks that had incredible illustrations in it that would just kind of captivate me, pull me into it.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I mean I can still, for some reason, some illustrations that stick in my mind are from the Book of Mormon, because we went to Salt Lake City and got a free copy of the Book of Mormon, and it had, I'm not Mormon, I'm not LDS, but I still remember there were just amazing paintings, and some of you, your first experiences with Scripture may be heavily associated with like illustrations in Bibles.
We had the big family Bible. That was for a long time our only Bible in my house when I was a kid. And I used to flip through it because it had a lot of the Renaissance art,
Oh wow.
religious art in there. So my view of Jesus and heaven and everything was kind of skewed as a result of that, because wow, all these people look like Europeans. But it kind of helped me as a kid visualize some of what the Bible was talking about, and kind of piqued that curiosity that what the heck is in this book?
Totally, and for so many of us, I think our vision of how, what Jesus looked like, if it had, say, any images from the Sistine Chapel that maybe had pictures of God the Father,
Yeah,
which
there was.
I have theological issues with, but, or just what the Bible stories look like, as they pointed out, totally. JR, were you holding up?
Well, I don't know exactly what you would call it, but rosaries have a lot of art in them. Some of them are very ornate. This one has, an ornate cross, but they usually also have some
Medallion?
kind of commemoration here, and then some of them have a lot more than that. But there is something certainly that is visual and
100%.
tactile.
And I was about to say, also tactile, a kinesthetic experience, 100%. And some of you may have jewelry to remind you of things. Maybe you have a medallion of a saint. Maybe you have a candle with a picture of a saint on it. Or something that hangs from your rearview mirror, absolutely. So there's small little things. One of my wife, one of her students, she teaches English to adult learners, and one of her students gave her this kind of real blingy, rosary-looking thing to hang from her rearview mirror to ward off, as the student said, evil spirits. And I said, well, you can at least put it there as a reminder of your faith. I don't know where the student is kind of coming from on that. Okay, so that's great. Thank y'all. Tonight, I'm just going to blitz through a couple of questions. Number one is a little bit broader, okay? And it's how are we as human beings shaped by visual things, okay? how do visual things work on us? Maybe y'all discuss a similar thing with poetry. And second, what role can visual art play in spiritual formation, specifically Christian spiritual formation? So I hope this doesn't feel too lectury. And if y'all are bored, you can be like Homer Simpson and when he yells boring at the TV. So y'all can do that, or just ask me questions if you get bored. But we'll at least see some pictures. So let's kind of hit this first thing, how we shape up visual things. I want to give you kind of 4 ideas. Sorry, buddy. I'm going to give you 4 ideas that I think are important in terms of how we as humans interact with the visual. Number 1, I would posit to you something that's probably not that controversial, but it says visual art can do work that words cannot do. Okay, that's
Even if you have 1,000 words?
if you have 1,000 words, maybe there's an equivalency there, right? But no more than 1,000. Okay, so I want to start with a little. We're not going to read this whole thing. I googled like description of Niagara Falls, and this is, Google now spits out an AI generated thing. Let's take Niagara Falls for example. Okay, there are many different ways to experience Niagara Falls, even if you don't go visit. One is to read the AI generated Google summary, which is like, it's located on the Niagara River, which connects Lake Erie. There are falls were formed about 14,000 years ago when glaciers melted, right? Kind of just facts. The world's largest waterfall by volume, with 3,160 tons of water flowing over it every second. Okay, this is one way to experience Niagara Falls, reading facts about it, right? How about this? Here's another way to experience Niagara Falls. This is the first written description we have of Niagara Falls, okay? And this is from, I think it was a French priest who recorded this, and at some point it was translated into kind of slightly archaic English. This wonderful downfall is compounded of 2 great cross streams of water and 2 falls, with an isle sloping along the middle of it. The waters which fall from this horrible precipice, I love random capitalizations back in the day, do foam and boil after the most hideous manner imaginable, making an outrageous noise more terrible than that of thunder. Okay, still words, but getting a little more into poetic language, right? I commend to you guys, C.S. Lewis wrote about ordinary, scientific, and poetic language, and talking about how each of those types, some of y'all may have read this excerpt from him, each of those 3 types of language work on us in different ways. And each of them brings something to the table that the others don't, okay? Here's another way to experience Niagara Falls. We're getting into the visual, okay? What kind of map is this called? Does anybody know? And really, it's kind of, don't ignore that.
Topographic.
It's a topographical map or topo map. We use this in Scouts all the time. What are the things that you can learn from a topographical map?
Elevations.
Elevations are marked, good.
Bodies of water.
Where bodies of water are. In this case, where the sprawling metroplex of Niagara Falls.
Yes.
If you go there, it is like Disneyland, kind of, if you look at it from the wrong direction. That's right. So this is another way to know Niagara Falls, okay? If you are hiking around it, this would probably be more helpful to have than Father Hennepin's description. Although this would be exciting to have, it might be less practical. Here's another way to experience Niagara Falls. You can look at a satellite photo. Maybe it gives us a little more information. I mean, I can't tell really where rapids, I mean, maybe I could read contour lines and get a sense of where rapids are. But here's another way, right? We're still in the realm of the visual. But does this get at the grandeur of them? Not necessarily. Here's another way. This is Frederick Edwin Church's painting. I teach this in American art history. One of the most famous landscapes in American art history. He sort of brings you out over the waters, like you're floating over the waters. There's a rainbow that cuts in here. Could you kill the light, Brian? And we'll see if we can get some color going on here, or less color. We get the green of the water, we get these clouds, and you get closer to feeling the thunder, right, in your chest with something like this. Or this, also by the same artist. Or this, by a different artist, John Vanderlyn. Or this, also by Vanderlyn. This has something that we haven't seen in the other paintings in Niagara Falls. Do you see it?
People.
People, to scale, okay? Or this by Albert Bierstadt.
Where were the people in that last one?
Sorry, it's right there.
Oh,
Little tiny people,
Yes.
scale. Hannah's like, boom, saw him instantly. Kind of blending over the trees here, okay? I would suggest to you that these artworks are doing some lifting in communicating the idea of Niagara Falls to us that a Google AI-generated sort of text cannot do. Or even poetry and words. Poetry and words can do things that this cannot do, but this brings another dimension. Y'all probably don't have to be convinced of this. Some Christians do. And I'm not saying in order to be a good Christian, you have to like love painting or anything like that. But there is something about seeing these, whether it's just looking at another human's sort of eyesight, kind of getting inside their head and seeing through their eyesight, or just sort of creating a sensation, maybe even in our own bodies from seeing these. This can happen in the church too, right? Here is Mark's account of the crucifixion. Mark, the Ernest Hemingway of gospel writers, right? Short, punchy, to the point. It was the third hour when they crucified him. This is our ordinary language. Our scientific language, a way of knowing about the crucifixion, might be this, which I'm not going to read. This is a couple of medical doctors who talked about actually what happens physiologically to a crucified victim. Or we can experience the crucifixion in this way. This is a painting by a Russian artist named Nikolai Gay, and it is an absolutely, probably the second most awful crucifixion in art history. Have you guys seen this before? Some of you may have. It's kind of rare. It's Russian. It was behind the Iron Curtain for a long time, and then kind of when communism collapsed, and art historians actually got to sort of interact with Russian collections more. This sort of awareness of this made it back to the West. What do y'all see in this painting?
There's a person back there.
Yeah. See this
Is that
person?
like his spirit?
It looks like it. I don't know. And kind of a translucent looking person.
It looks like a soldier.
Yeah, soldier or magistrate.
Or it's torn, it could be the torn garment that was being gambled for.
But there's good head.
I see, no, but I mean the garment itself looks.
Yeah, maybe this is the dude who won the garment in the gambling. Okay. What I think is striking is here's somebody just turning his back on Jesus. Right. Here is a man of sorrows. Right. We esteemed him not, and the world kind of turns its back. What else do you see in this? That's a little unusual, maybe, or different, or just details you notice.
Just pain.
Yeah, it's an absolutely agonizing image. I mean, the sense of his shoulders being yanked out of socket. You know,
Why
things.
is the other guy still upright above the, yeah,
He's trying to breathe.
He was stronger.
Okay.
This is presumably the penitent thief who looks. There's kind of a look of compassion on his face, and here is presumably the impenitent thief.
There's such a wall of darkness behind. I don't know that I've seen that in other, it's not like I've studied crucifix paintings,
Yeah.
but that really strikes me that the hour of darkness that comes in the Gospels, right? He's really
100%.
depicting that.
Yes, and that's what this painter is highlighting. And I always feel like it's like darkness rolling across the land, about to overtake everything.
And you say this was painted during the Soviet era?
No, this is actually late 19th century. It was just we didn't have access to it because I guess we weren't traveling as
Can you
far.
say the name one more time, Nikolai?
Nikolai Gay, G-E, sometimes G-H-E.
So, I've always thought of a full cross whenever I think of a crucifixion, and I've never seen a photo that I can recall where it's just a straight T
Yes.
looking shape.
Yes, what I find so fascinating about this painting is it's not doing the standard conventions that you see in so many crucifixions, which is with what is called a Latin cross, which is kind of the lowercase t shape we're used to. This is more a taw-shaped cross. And this might actually be more archaeologically accurate when it comes to crucifixion. I've read some accounts that the victims of crucifixion would carry this crossbeam primarily to the side of execution. And it seems like there's, one of the things I note, I mean, we could just sit here, we could camp out with this image for a long time, but one of the things that I think is really striking is that Jesus is not what we see in so many Renaissance paintings, like in Raphael's.
Up above the other one.
Exactly. Jesus is at the same level because for all they know, he's just a common criminal. He dies a common criminal's death. And this crucifixion is no different from the thousands of crucifixions Roman soldiers carry out on the outskirts of cities, except there's like earthquakes and, you know, the sky going dark. The crown of thorns slips off his head as he kind of slumps in agony, and horribly, this is really horribly, the nails go through his Achilles tendon on the sides of the cross. This gets at the crucifixion in a visceral way that some of these other ways of experiencing crucifixion don't, and they're important to take on board, but I feel like this is adding to both the conversation and also our devotion, potentially. There's a long, long history of saints and mystics meditating on imagery of the crucifixion, joining themselves to, in whatever way they can, to the sufferings of Christ. If you go to Florence, Italy, has anybody been to Florence to the monastery of San Marco? Did y'all go to the famous?
No, I've been to Florence, but I don't
Okay.
remember if we went there.
There's a famous monastery, Dominican monastery, and every cell was decorated by a famous artist named Fra Angelico, and every cell has a crucifixion in it. So every monk in their cell looks at that wall and is meditating on the death of Jesus every day. There's the author. Okay, so I would posit to you that art brings something that words do not, again, you guys do not need convincing of this. I want to secondly suggest to you something you probably intuitively also agree with. We are shaped by images in general, okay? So there's this term that was coined by a French philosopher called optocracy. And if you think of like democracy, what does that mean? Rule of the people? I'm not sure what demo means. It's one of these rule-related words, but this philosopher suggests our society is an optocracy. It's ruled by optical things. It's ruled by images, okay? So think about, I'm just curious. Before I show my own examples of this, can you think of ways that we're being shaped and formed by sort of visual things in our culture in the U.S.? Go where you want with that.
Oh, television, for sure.
Television, right? YouTube, any sort of moving media that comes to us through a screen. Yeah.
And I think that shapes us to be passive viewers.
Yes.
If that's part of the, kind of what we're talking about.
It's active on, it acts on us. I mean, my students go to movies. They don't go to art museums. Art students don't go to art museums because they find them boring and not, they're not acting on them in the way that video games or movies are. What else? What are some other ways that we are shaped by images? Architecture. I mean, our buildings say a lot about what we value as a society. They talk about kind of how big or small do we feel as humans. 100% our buildings are shaping us.
Images of idealistic, perfect human bodies that make everybody else feel bad. That you don't measure up to the perfect bodies that you see.
That's right, and that has ripple effects that affect a lot of my students, for sure.
I think it's primarily directed at women, but I think men can feel it too.
And inclusive of the larger than that, because up until recently, see if you saw something, it was because you actually saw the thing. Even in the shortest interpretation of history, television is an eye blink and photography is an eye blink, and so whatever it is that we just see over and over again, we just come to assume that's what's normal and that's the way things are. And especially, for example, like the composition of families and that sort of thing. for most of the time the television's been around, the statistical proportions of what constitutes a family and that kind of thing on television have not reflected what's in society, but society kind of shifts to become like that because whatever you see, you just think, well, that's just the way things are and that's how to be normal, and so I'll just do that because that's what you do.
Normalization of the non-nuclear family, for example. Hey, do you wanna come in? You can tell me.
Just got off work.
Do you wanna sit here?
Is that okay?
Front row. How am I doing on time? I should probably look here. Okay. Okay, are there other things? Yes?
I was thinking behaviorally, like traffic signs and traffic stripes, that's all visual, doesn't say anything.
I've never thought about that, but absolutely. Well, I mean, that's a benign daily way we are being shaped by visual things, 100%. Yeah. Lights, signs, billboards. So I'm gonna, just real quickly, this will, again, not be surprising to y'all, go to Times Square, and it's hard to argue with the fact that we live in an autocracy, okay? This is the kingdom of light and noise that is trying to get us to buy things, trying to shape our desires, and form us into people who desire certain things that cost money. I think about the death of George Floyd. I think we'll get to presidential debates in a second, and how the optics of that are what seem to, grip this mass movement of protest. I think about presidential debates, which we have recently experienced as well. And y'all probably remember the whole thing about the Kennedy-Nixon debate, where the people who heard it on the radio said Nixon won, and the people who saw it on TV said JFK won, because on TV, Nixon was dealing, I think, with the aftermath of the flu or a cold or something. He was kind of gross and sweaty and blowing his nose. And JFK, had all the young optics. He was youthful and charismatic. But apparently just if you hear it, you might have a different opinion. So optics are, in some cases, determining the destiny of presidential elections, in part. Think about the debate between Biden and Trump, and Biden's performance affecting how the election shook out. Tiananmen Square, right? This images of the protester in front of the tanks in Tiananmen Square. Images from the Vietnam War, self-immolation of a Buddhist monk. Some of the images of children running from their village burning turns the tide of American opinion. Okay, these are all images shaping how society is being formed. And recently, just the taking down of so many Confederate monuments. Here's the one in Charlottesville, which was vandalized and then removed. And this is what struck me. It was earlier this year, last year. It was melted down, and utterly destroyed, which makes me feel weird as an artist. There's a whole debate to have about this, but I think it really points to the idea of people who don't care about art or sculptures, public sculptures at all, suddenly feel really invested in this sort of thing. And there's almost like a superstitious quality to saying, we need to rid the earth of this thing by melting it down.
And there's an overt acknowledgement on, I won't even say both, but all sides of the issue, that the physical control and management of this object in some way, to your autocracy point, shapes what people are going to think and believe and do.
What kind of messages do public sculptures send is one of the big flashpoints.
The original message that sculpture sent when it was put up, the the reason we have the sculpture of a lot of the Southern heroes, those were granted to keep peace in the South. They put these up so that, yes, you can have your heroes. You're still part of the United States. You can have your Southern heroes. So they were put up to placate the Southerners after being defeated in the war. Now, we're ripping them down and destroying them to placate people who are not happy that the thing exists in the first place. So it's kind of ironic. It was put up to create peace, and now it's being taken down to create peace. Unfortunately, I don't find that it's created peace by ripping these things down.
Yeah.
It's,
And me, as somebody who, like C.S. Lewis, believes that we need to have beautiful things in society. I feel, I feel that something is lost. And the efforts, somebody puts, sweat and equity and hard work into that thing, and then we just melt it down,
I know, this is one, there are actually two Robert E. Lee sculptures, there are others, that were removed. This one, the one in Richmond, I think, was moved to a museum, and this one was melted down.
Yeah.
I don't know, there's a whole debate to be had about what to do with Confederate sculptures. Do we erect a competing sculpture? Do we move it to a museum?
Destroying history.
Move it to a cemetery, yeah, but the destruction of this kind of bothered me.
The debate takes a nasty turn if you let it.
I didn't know this is what happened. We lived in Charlottesville for 5 years. All our babies were born there. Brian went to school there. We saw that statue. I didn't know this is what happened to it.
Yeah.
I knew there was debate
Well,
over it,
yeah.
but I didn't know it got melted down to.
Yeah, the one in Richmond didn't, but this one did.
No, yeah,
So
it was.
that
yeah,
statue was-
the permission to remove it was granted on condition that it get moved to a museum, and the museum trustees literally overnight had it shipped and melted down.
Yeah, it was in fact, it was melted down at a secret location. Anyway, point being, we'll get to that in a second. It just shows how these images almost become totems for people who are otherwise not invested in art. This gets to the point about bodies, right? How are we being rewired by swimsuit issues, or pornography, or things of that nature, right? Perception of each other as humans. Do we view each other as humans or pieces of meat? That's a live issue in an autocracy. Okay, so I would posit to you that some of the shaping by images is good, some of it's benign. Traffic signs actually seem pretty good. And I think some of it's bad, but we're gonna be shaped because this is the world we live in, okay? We live in an extremely visual society, including images that can form us spiritually. So here we go. We got stained glass, right? We've already talked about this. The stories of the Bible being told to the illiterate. And now you go to a place like Saint-Chapelle in Paris, and you can see the entire story of the Bible. Literate people can see the entire story of the Bible acted out before them in stained glass, Old and New Testaments. Here's our flannel graph. This is here just for Jen Stewart. Anybody else? This brings back huge wave of nostalgia. Or I remember we had these clothespin people that were stuck in this sort of styrofoam bases, and I was just fascinated by it. So this, for many of us, this is foundational to our childhood sort of catechesis. What?
He's pointing at the screen.
Robert is in.
Hey, that's right. See, it's working. It's working. I wonder what's going on with this guy right here.
And the one in the tree, that's like he.
That's awesome. This right here, have y'all seen this picture before?
Yes.
Maybe your grandparent. My grandparents had a version of this in their house. This was a photograph that was later kind of tinted or colored, and sort of, it looks a little like a painting, a little like a photo, and it was mass reproduction in the States. And for a brief period of time in my wife Laura's life, this is how she kind of imagined God the Father. This is hanging in your grandparents' house, is that right?
I think my grandparents, yes.
Grandparents' house. So Laura does not still think this is God. I want to be very clear. But in fact, it's kind of I always thought it was looking like Robert E. Lee. I think it's some kind of level, so again, the Robert E. Lee thing. You know, and that's just a version of this. You know, how many people just out in society think of God the Father as looking like this because of the sort of dissemination of the Sistine Chapel imagery. Again, this is something I have theological problems with, but we don't have time for that right now. Or our vision of Jesus. What is our vision of Jesus? This is Warner Solomon. Have y'all seen this before?
Oh,
I
yes.
call it the doe-eyed Jesus.
The doe-eyed Jesus.
They've got this one hanging in Wisteria where we do hymn sing. every night.
Oh, really?
Oh,
Okay.
something very similar.
No, it's
but
this one.
it
It's
is
this one.
Like this painting, this one has had widespread distribution. Okay, and I try to make the point to my students: is this part of a white supremacist cabal to get people to think Jesus is blue-eyed? No, it's not. This is just for years. I mean, maybe white supremacists have at some point appropriated the sort of thing and said Jesus is blue-eyed. But for years, artists have just been using the models around them for Jesus. And so you can do a worldwide kind of survey of this, whether it's in China. Here is the Last Supper in China with an Asian-looking Jesus and his apostles. Or in Korea, where Jesus is given a sort of philosopher's hat. Or Ethiopia. Here's an Ethiopian crucifixion. Or an Indian Madonna and Child. Or this is Panamanian. This is a mysterious kind of wooden image. It's called the Cristo Negro. It washed up, and nobody really knew where it came from, but they now dress it up, and it's an important religious image. This is called a different Black Christ. This is in Guatemala. So, like all over the world, every culture that Christianity has landed in has reinterpreted Jesus in terms of their own culture, which I think is super appropriate because the gospel is for everybody. Okay, so if you see a blonde-haired, blue-eyed Jesus in Renaissance art, it's probably not a white supremacist kind of move. Although generally in the Renaissance, Jesus is not blonde-haired. Aaron Douglas's crucifixion. He's a 1920s Harlem Renaissance painter, and so here's Jesus carrying the cross. All the way to Scientific Americans. I don't know. This is 15, 20 years ago, they used forensic kind of analysis of skulls in Galilee, first century skulls, to kind of work out what Jesus may have looked like, and this is what it came up with. Okay, all of this stuff, I would argue, potentially has a bearing on our prayer life, right? Sometimes we close our eyes, maybe we imagine God the Father, maybe we imagine Jesus, maybe we don't. But this is kind of the stuff that feeds into our hopper. And we're being shaped in our perceptions of God and Jesus, the Holy Spirit, stories from the Bible, by everything we've collected our entire lives that's gone into the hopper of our brains. This is not really for y'all, this is for maybe my tradition. The solution to bad images isn't no images, but good images. I try to, when I kind of unpack this at a minister's retreat, and honestly, I don't really get pushback on this. We are being catechized by the autocracy, okay? We are being acted on by images whether we want to or not, and those images are shaping our minds and our souls, sometimes our bodies. And so to try to create church as an image-neutral space is sort of handing over that catechesis to the world outside of the church. So I'm a proponent of, as Christians, let's think about visual things and kind of how those form us in our worship spaces and our private devotional spaces and so forth. Okay, so this is the rest of our time. How are we doing on time, Gabriel? You're the keeper of the clock. That's fine. Okay, thank you. In like 15 minutes, I'm going to blow through what role can art play in spiritual formation. And this is my brainstorming, okay? I'm going to give you 10 ways, and there are probably many, many more, that art can play a role in spiritual formation. And you can agree with this or not, whatever. But I want to start with Pope Benedict, who said, kind of like it. I don't know if I agree with this, but I kind of like it for, I guess, self-interested reasons. The only really effective apologia for Christianity comes down to two arguments, namely the saints the church has produced and the art which has grown in her womb. And I think there are probably a lot of really good, defenses of Christianity beyond these.
What does apologia mean?
This means kind of arguments in favor of, sort of defending apologetic arguments for Christianity. And Benedict said the really effective ones are the saints the church has produced and the art which the church has produced. So you can agree with that or not, but it's kind of interesting. Okay, here we go. Boom, 10 ways art can play a role in spiritual formation. This is the lightning round. So y'all holler if you have any questions or any comments. First, art can help us become more immersed in a biblical text. St. Ignatius's exercise, you may have heard of those, Ignatius of Loyola, had these spiritual exercises where you read a passage of Scripture, and as you do it, you imagine yourself in that text. Like you imagine the temperature, the sights, the sounds. What do the apostles look like? What does Jesus look like? How do you feel? Okay, complete imaginative immersion. And this argument would go, art helps us do that, or at least helps kind of break open new kind of possibilities in our mind for it. So here's one I would suggest that does that. This is Caravaggio's Incredulity of Thomas. Have you guys seen this before? Just absolutely kind of harrowing, right? Jesus grabs Thomas's finger and pulls it into the wound on his side. And there is a corporeality to the body of Jesus in this. There is a solidity to it. He's not some little paper Byzantine guy, nothing wrong with Byzantine art, but there is a fleshiness to him. And this painting serves as a little piece of visual theology saying the resurrection body of Christ was real. He wasn't a ghost. He's not putting his hand through Casper going all the way through, right? The skin kind of has a little fold on it, and it's really unnerving and gross. And also I love this, like there's a little rip in his garment, and he's like shocked, and they're leaning in, curious, and the whole focus is right here. Just great. So I think, and you can probably think of ways this happens, art helps like just dunk us in a text, fully surrounded by it. Is this a documentary of what happened? No. Right? We don't know exactly what Jesus looked like or what the situation was like, but it gives us another angle, right? And helps us kind of enter into the story in a special way. Okay, number 2, help engage our bodies and senses in worship. Man, Anglicans are great about this. Just the shape of a church building, right? So many church buildings are cruciform shaped. And baptismal fonts are often at the western end where you physically enter the building. There's a symbol, I think baptism is a sacrament, not a symbol, but there is a thing that speaks to how we spiritually enter the church as well. Spaces that encourage us to use our bodies in certain ways. Having kneelers, what we have in the sanctuary here. Pillows to kneel on are encouraging us to bow before God. So our bodies are shaped by worship spaces. Worship spaces that draw our attention upwards and overwhelm us with beauty. Okay, also play a role in our worship of God. This is Saint Chapelle, the church I mentioned earlier. No time to talk about it. We're moving on. How about this? This is a pilgrimage church in France called Saint Foy. It's a Romanesque church, and Gothic is fine, but I'm a Romanesque guy. This is the kind of Western medieval architecture 1.0. Gothic is the 2.0. But I like the 1.0 stuff. It's a little simpler. But where it does have quite a bit simpler actually, but where the main place Romanesque architecture often has decoration is on the tympanum, which is the area above the entrance to the church. And here is a last judgment scene. Jesus is judging the nations, and there's a hell scene right here. And you can imagine walking into a church and on Sunday morning, and you're reminded of the reality of heaven and hell. And it's like, oh, maybe I should take this seriously. Straighten up and fly right. Medieval peasants and us. How about this? To help us feel more rationally or emotionally connected to God, this is one of the things that art can do. You've probably seen this painting before if you've read Henry Nouwen's book, The Return of the Prodigal Son. This is one of the most moving treatments of this beloved parable of Jesus. The son kneels here, the father gently puts his hands on the son. The older brother holds back his affection. He and the father address the same, but their hands are doing totally different things, right? And Henry Nouwen saw this painting in the Hermitage Museum in Russia. And this was like a turning point in his relationship with God. He pulled out a chair and stared at it for hours. And this painting was kind of the beginning of him seeing that God really loves him as a son. And of course, there are so many great prodigal son paintings. But all these, I mean, help us see the story in a new way and remind us that God is the father in the story, right? And this is what he longs for each of us. And this is a story we need to, like, every day tell ourselves because it was so good. How about this? This is really gross, but powerful. This is called The Pest House, Christ Heals the Sick. This is Christ. This is a contemporary artist named Edward Nippers he paints biblical scenes. He's a little o Orthodox Christian, but he has a lot of nudity in his works, which has caused some scandal, even though he's kind of trying to preach the gospel through his works. And Christ goes to this place of like this den of absolute disgustingness. There are these patients with sarcomas. They're reacting in different ways. This guy lifts his arms to be healed by Jesus. Jesus seems to be hauling like a half-rotten corpse under his arm as he stalks through this low place, reaching out to heal people. This guy seems to recoil, almost like he doesn't want to be healed. And just the idea of Jesus as a healer, I think really comes through in this painting, and the idea that Jesus will go into the lowest, most disgusting places. There's no place too low for Christ. I think it's really powerful. All right, so helping us feel maybe more emotionally connected to God. Love this sculpture. This is from Chartres Cathedral. It's the creation of Adam. And here it's Christ. He has a cruciform halo, which is one of the ways we know it's Christ. Christ himself is creating Adam. And there's something so tender about the way Adam's head rests on Christ's lap. I feel like this is the sort of thing that like counselors need to give to people who struggle with, like, does God really love me? And art is a really great way of communicating these truths at an emotional level. Okay, how are we doing on time? Oh, look, I got it. Remind us of the cloud of witnesses. You guys do this really well. I think about the chapel during, I need to go see the icons, but the Orthodox Church has icons on their iconostasis, which is like a wall. And the idea is when you are worshiping with fellow Christians on Sunday morning, you need to remember that you are part of a much bigger worship service that includes people in heaven. Dead saints who have gone on before, who are alive in Christ. And we are joining them in worship. So that's one of the things art can do. How about this? Remind us of the historicity of Christianity by helping visualize like things that are out of our experience, things that are sometimes hard to believe. Example, the Annunciation. Henry Ossawa Tanner, one of the great interpreters of biblical scenes, American painter, has one of the most unique Annunciations that you'll ever come across. His angel Gabriel is a shaft of light, almost like a Star Trek transporter.
Reminds me of Star Trek, the motion picture.
It's very Star Trek.
The first road from the future.
Yeah, that's right. Good reference. Wow. And here's Mary, and Tanner went to the Near East and studied what like these sorts of dwellings would look like. And there are wonderful little details, like there's a little kink in the rug right there. She's not sure what she thinks, but it'd be pretty terrifying if a shaft of light appeared in your room. And I feel like that is kind of lost on us when we read this story. And maybe it looked like this. Maybe this explains some of Mary's terror. Here's another quick example, very different. This is a tomb that I'll give you a chance to sort of interpret it. It's the cover of a tomb. It's breaking open, and there's a woman and a baby coming out of the tomb. This is commissioned by a grieving husband who lost his wife and child in childbirth, and he commissions them being resurrected when Jesus comes back. And that's sometimes when we put dirt on the coffin in the ground, you think, can anything come from this? Is the resurrection actually going to happen? And it can feel, it's like, oh, is that even possible? And this sort of thing maybe adds just a little drop in the bucket towards it is possible. There's an artist named Stanley Spencer, a British painter, who has all these resurrection scenes in British churchyards in the 20th century. And people are getting out of graves and dusting themselves off. And they're just really marvelous. I think we need to meditate on the fact that as Christians, we believe that's actually going to happen. There will be a bodily resurrection. And it's really hard to imagine, and art can help us do that. Number 6, to stir up a deep sense of beauty and longing. I think that's important in our spiritual lives. I don't know if y'all remember this. In 2017, there was a study that came out that said, first, there are a lot more young people in the UK claim to be Christians than we thought. Does this mean they're going to church every day? Not necessarily, but they are willing to tick the Christian box as opposed to sort of the nun box. And so that was the first part. The second surprising thing is churches and cathedrals were a part of that. Because these are spaces these young people would walk into and they'd be overwhelmed by the fact that this is a different environment from anything else in my life. Different from concerts, different from pubs, different from street corners. This is a place that has been set apart in some way I don't experience in any other way in my life. And it's stirred up some deep things within me. And according to this survey, some young people are saying a piece of my conversion was walking into a church building, a beautiful church building. Which I can't say that really happens in the Church of Christ because our buildings are often so sort of practical and utilitarian. Some of them are beautiful. But again, I think this is important to consider if one is designing a church building, that the building itself is part of evangelism. And it's also a statement of what we think about God. Frederick Buechner, if you know anything about him, famous writer, converted from agnosticism when he was a young adult. And a piece of his conversion was, not the only piece, was this drawing by Leonardo da Vinci, the head of Christ. And Buechner said this: Da Vinci's Jesus was the face that moved me and stayed with me. And this is when when he wasn't a Christian. More than all the others. Not because it was Jesus' face, but just because it seemed to be the face of a human being to whom everything had happened that can happen. It was a face of great stillness, a face that had survived. What haunted me was so strong a feeling of the painter's having, in some unimaginable way, caught the likeness just right. As if, without knowing it, I had already seen deep within myself some vision of what Christ looked like, or what I hoped he looked like, on the basis of which I could affirm the picture's authenticity. I'm just reading this. I had come across many other representations of Jesus' face in my day, but this was one that I could somehow vouch for. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I seem always to have kept track of it, as though to have a way of recognizing him if ever our paths happen to cross again. Okay? I don't really get that. It's fine. It's competent drawing. It's beautiful. But there was something that answered something deep within this one person in this picture. And art has a way of doing that. This painting right here is probably I would say maybe the closest time I had, the closest experience I had to Buechner's. It wasn't part of my conversion. I was already a Christian. But I saw this at the Chicago Art Institute. And it's an image of a pilgrimage in northern France. And these are like 19th century pilgrims. And they're not nuns. They're just wearing these Bretonese sort of head coverings. And they're holding candles. And I turned a corner. And this is by a not super important painter. It's not like a really famous painting, but I was just like really deeply moved by this for reasons I couldn't understand. I think it's incredibly beautiful. Their headdresses remind me of like the flowers on lily pads floating in a pool. Anyway, don't have time to talk more about that. Moving on. How about this? To help us contemplate and reinforce a Christian view of mortality. The visual arts have a long history in this, whether it is paintings of saints holding skulls. This is St. Francis. We usually think of Francis like in terms of bird baths and like concrete statues we put in our gardens, or a hippie holding a flower or petting wolves. But this is a 17th century depiction of Francis that shows him as a praying mystic, and he's holding a human skull to remind himself of his own death, which is something you see in art a lot, and presumably part of the mystical tradition. This is a different Francis from the one that often gets co-opted for hippie kind of reasons. Even a still life painting like this. We have a skull, we have an oil lamp that's smoldering, we have an inkwell spilled over, we have a wine glass that's been tucked over. All these symbols of the brevity of life, right? The book of life, right here. There are a million different artworks I could point to that are created for the purpose of reminding you that you're going to die and you need to meditate on that. And that is a really good corrective to everything else in our society today that wants to put off reminding us the fact that we're going to die. In fact, you could get really gruesome about this. We could do a whole thing on bone chapels. These are chapels and ossuaries that are Christian worship spaces that are decorated with bones of people that have been taken from cemeteries. And inevitably, every single one of these has a phrase in Latin or Spanish, wherever you go, that says something to the effect of, as if the bones are speaking, what you are, we once were, and what we are, you will be, or you will become, all right? That has a long history in Christianity, and we don't really talk about it very much. And I'm so curious what my students think sometimes when I show this stuff. We just have a lot of memento mori stuff in one of my classes. Okay, number 8 in my 10 ways that art can play a role in spiritual formation. How about to help correct bad theology? Okay, do angels look like this, or this, or do they look like this? Right, or I should say heavenly beings, perhaps. Kind of terrifying, covered in eyes. All right. I think there just as good things can come theologically through art. I think incorrect things can be taught through art, and hopefully there can be kind of a corrective in really great Christian art. Number 9, to help us read Scripture alongside the historic church, there is an absolute storehouse of theological treasure in the tradition of Christian art. And one aspect of that storehouse is making connections that the early church was making when they were applying spiritual readings, say, to the Old Testament. They would read the Old Testament and see Jesus all over the Old Testament. And visual art is one of the ways that's been preserved for us. So, for example, Lucas Cranach the Elder, this is not a Catholic. This is a Reformation painter, the official, probably propagandist of the Reformation. But he has this visual sermon in here. And it's a story of several trees. We have the tree of life here. We have the tree that Christ is crucified on. And in the distance here, we have the tree, in a sense. Do y'all know what that is right there? Can you tell?
Serpent.
The bronze serpent, right? So there's this explicit connection between the serpent that brought death in the garden, brings life, and Jesus himself said, if the Son is man, just as Moses lifted up the bronze serpent in the desert, so the Son of Man is going to be lifted up.
So you've got the loincloth in the same kind of serpentine shape.
Yeah, that's an interesting observation. Totally. And look, here's our taw-shaped cross again.
What is the bronze snake? I'm not familiar with that.
That is the Old Testament story in which the Israelites, in the midst of their rebellion in the wilderness, are punished by God sending poisonous serpents to bite them. And they cry out to the Lord, and Father Brian will help me out with the details here. They cry out to the Lord, and God instructs Moses to make a bronze serpent and put it up on a pole, and everyone who looks to the serpent is healed.
Okay.
And that's basically seen as a foreshadow. I mean, Jesus makes this connection explicit, but it's seen as a foreshadowing of Christ being lifted up on the cross and healing us, healing our sins. This is an altarpiece. That is making all these connections between the Old Testament and the New Testament. It's the altarpiece of the Holy Sacrament. And in the main panel here, Jesus is instituting the Lord's Supper, and then it's surrounded by 4 stories that kind of echo some of the imagery that points to the Lord's Supper. And early Christians would have said, these are scriptures we read about in the Old Testament that are kind of typological foreshadowing of the institution of the Eucharist. We have Abraham greeting Melchizedek. We have the Passover associated with the Exodus. We have the gathering of manna in the wilderness, and we have Elijah being woken by the angel, and there's like bread ready for him to eat. So it's bread, 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 bread in the Old Testament, and the early church is reading these stories of bread and saying, oh, they're just kind of prefiguring the Eucharist in some way. Oh, we're almost done here, y'all. Imagery of Adam toiling. Here's the expulsion from the garden. Here is Jesus ushering Adam and Eve out of the Garden of Eden, out into the wide world where they have to work by the sweat of their brow, and childbirth is painful. And here Adam is hacking away with a hoe. Here is Adam digging with a shovel. All this post-fall.
With a bare foot.
And what? Yeah, that's painful to think about, right? Your arch is really hurting if you're.
Dug very deep.
Well, at least he had iron readily available.
That's right. That's right. We do have some anachronistic tools going on here. Not the wooden shovel he was probably using. And something I really love is, so this is after the fall, but after the resurrection in the garden where Mary Magdalene interacts with Jesus, Jesus is often holding a hoe or another gardening tool. That's not in Scripture, but Mary thinks he's the gardener. And a lot of artists said, well, there's got to be a reason she thought he was a gardener, so they have him holding tools. It's the best. He's holding a shovel. But also, Jesus is the second Adam, right? He's the new and better Adam. And so the first Adam is working by the sweat of his brow, holding tools, and Jesus has echoes of being the second Adam in this new world that has kind of begun with his resurrection. Okay, finally, here's number 10. And again, I would argue there are more. I feel like visual art can serve as a counterweight to chronological snobbery in our cultural moment. Okay, what do I mean by that? I mean, there are certain Christian doctrines that are not very popular in society today, okay, or in the church today. For example, this is a great C.S. Lewis quote that gets to the idea, but we got to finish up. The idea of God's judgment, not very popular to talk about. Especially, I mean, I think probably most of my students think God's going to kind of save everybody in some way. I haven't polled them. Probably not everybody thinks that, but probably a lot of them do. This is John Martin, who paints a lot of cataclysms and apocalypses. And this is his visualization of, like, the end of the world, okay? And Jesus, I mean, think about the passage in Revelation where people are calling on the mountains to fall on them to save them from the wrath of the Lamb, okay? That's very different from a hippie Jesus. And I can almost see that happening. Here, these mountains are coming, and all these little dots are people tumbling into an abyss, okay, as the world is destroyed by fire. Images of hell. We don't have time to talk about Hieronymus Bosch. This is a crop from the Garden of Earthly Delights, but all these awful tortures, a guy being made to throw up, somebody pooping coins into a hole, pretty awful kind of stuff. This is not a documentary of what hell looks like. We don't know, okay? But as it's not very popular sometimes to talk about hell, maybe the history of Christian art can serve as kind of a corrective of things that are not as popular to talk about. Demons, church fathers talk about demons quite a bit. It can be sometimes considered passé to believe in malevolent work of the enemy and his minions in the world today, but Christian art has a robust affirmation of the demonic realm. Here's one more. This is where we'll wrap up. You walk in Germany, there are a couple of churches, and as you're walking into the churches, this one at the Cathedral of Worms, you see this beguiling woman. She smiles at us enticingly as we walk in. And you walk around to the back side, and she's being devoured by lizards and crabs and serpents, drilling into her body, devouring her. This is Frau Welt, or Lady World. She is a metaphor for sin, okay? This is what the world offers. Sin looks so enticing, and it draws us in. It's appealing, and all the while, it wants to destroy us, okay? Again, not always popular to talk about sin. Sin, hell, demons, not what evangelists tend to lead with, but that doesn't make them any less true. And lest you think they're picking on women, there's also the Prince der Welt, the Prince of the World. So he's smiling at us. He offers us stuff. He offers us an apple. That sounds kind of familiar. But he also is being devoured by like snakes and crabs and stuff because sin will mess
That
you
looks
up.
like a woman more than a man.
Yeah, I can't account for medieval haircuts. So, okay, so this is my argument. I need to wrap up here. These like 10 ways that art can play a role in spiritual formation. There are many more. I just want to make a case that let's think about what our eyes are looking at and think about how it's shaping us, not only broadly in society, but also like in our private devotions, in our worship services, in the things you're looking at, because we are not ghosts and we're not just sort of brains on sticks. We are people who have eyes and whose souls are being shaped by what we see. Okay, that's all I have. We need to wrap up. I had some discussion question or two, but I'm going to stop there.
What was that C.S. Lewis quote?
Oh yeah, let's go back to that. It's really good. This is from his introduction to Athanasius' On the Incarnation. He says, "It's a good rule, after reading a new book, never to allow yourself another new book until you have read an old one in between. Every age has its own outlook. It is especially good, that is, it being every age, is especially good at seeing certain truths, and especially liable to make certain mistakes. We all, therefore, need the books that will correct the characteristic mistakes of our own period. And that means the old books. Right? Just because something is old doesn't mean it's true. I think that's very important to say. But if a book has been around for a while, that means it's been tested a little bit, and it might have some gravity to it. It might have something to say. G.K. Chesterton talks about giving dead people a vote in your life, the democracy of the dead. And I think that's a pretty compelling idea. All right, do y'all have any questions?
Well, can you show us the questions?
Yeah, I really just had one question.
Oh, okay.
I don't mean to undercut everything I just talked about. What do you, like, dangers or pitfalls related to visual art? Can y'all think of that as well?
Well, just as good art can correct theology, bad art can put it in assumptions.
Yeah,
I know some of us have like Yul Brynner, the Ten Commandments in our head, and we think of like the Exodus, and like, what do you mean that the Ten Commandments weren't like written on by like a burst of lightning from so like we have this idea in our heads of how it went, and it's just because of visual media that we've been exposed to since Sunday school or in movies.
Moses' experience on the mountain,
Yeah.
what that was like.
Yeah, so there's assumptions are made based off of visual images.
Right.
And being exposed to an image over and over again can actually numb you to it, which is why you need so many different paintings of the crucifixion. Because if you just look at one, it might lose its potency. You need someone to do something different to remind you.
And there's kind of a thing too of having a multiplicity of images can serve as a corrective. Like, if you start thinking this is exactly what Jesus looks like, or this is what God the Father looks like, I don't think we should have images of God the Father. But having sort of correctives for us mentally, I think is really healthy. And also, just because it's old doesn't mean it's true, right? And I think that's really important to remember. I think that's one of the pitfalls for somebody like me who's like kind of a romantic and likes old things more than new things almost all the time. I need to be reminded that while something is older, maybe a little more time tested, in some ways it doesn't automatically mean it's true. All right, I think I'm done.
Dan, so we can
Unless you
have a
have
little bit
questions.
of discussion.
Yeah, let's have discussion. I just don't know
if
how much
people
time.
need to go, that's fine too. I'm just curious, well, practically speaking, how can we as Christians incorporate art into our lives that does some of those 10 things? Like what?
Yeah.
I mean, other than like, let's go to the museum every weekend.
Right.
How do we make art more part of our
Good
lives
to
in
see you.
positive ways?
Bye.
Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Questions?
I would say number one, email me, and I'll send you my list of like 20 or so works that I think are theologically true and really moving and effective for Christian devotion. And pretty much all of them you can find like reproductions of. And surround yourself at home, if you want to, with one or more of these. There's an exercise, it's kind of a takeoff of Lectio Divina called Visio Divina. I think that's like the fake Episcopalian-ish name for kind of like meditating on images, which I think is a good thing to do. The church has done that for thousands of years, 2,050, not 2,000 years, let's say about 1,500 years. And it's just an exercise where you spend time camping out with an image and doing sort of an Ignatian kind of contemplative experience with it. That's one option. I mean, I got my brother-in-law an image of Rembrandt's Return of the Prodigal Son, the painting that Nowan writes about, and he ended up framing it and having it in his home, and he would look at it in his office, and he looked at it every day. And I think looking at something every day, something that is faith affirming and true, can maybe change us in ways we're not aware of.
Yeah.
Anyway, that'd be one place to start. Also, I have a bunch of book recommendations too.
What was the one book about the return of the prodigal son?
Henry Nouwen is called The Return of the Prodigal Son by Henry Nouwen.
Nowen?
Nouwen. And it's a little kind of devotional reflection on how this painting kind of changed his life. And I think he overanalyzes it a little bit, but he also has some really good things to say about it. And it's an example of one artwork changing the spiritual life of one person. And it's kind of compelling. That'd be a great book to read.
I really enjoyed this talk. It was
Oh,
really
thanks.
good.
So email Dan if you've got, if you wanna see 20 pieces of artwork.
Yeah,
that we
I
recommend.
have a Word document ready to send
Awesome.
you. Yeah.
So one thing I noticed is when we were talking about ornithography, I think I said that right, society, you use very modern photos.
Yeah.
Like pictures of George Floyd or the debate. I felt like, just from an outside perspective, as a younger guy, there aren't many modern photos that we can use in, like of Christ and stuff like that. Do you
Sure.
think there's any opportunity for something like that? Because I'm not into the whole painting. I love it. I
Of
haven't
course.
seen that before, but I feel like as the new generation with social media, that's just starting to fade out. Is there any opportunity for something like that, I guess? I don't know what I'm trying to say, but.
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak to the photography and angle other than say film is probably filling that role more than anything. The Passion of the Christ, do y'all remember when the Passion of the Christ came out? It's a sustained, it's really bloody and it's not for everybody, but it is a sustained meditation on the crucifixion of Jesus that's based on a devotional work called The Dolorous Passion of Jesus by a female mystic. And I feel like there's like a wave, at least in popular culture, there's a wave of conversions that follow that film. I remember the lead singer of Creed. Do y'all remember Creed?
Yes.
The lead singer of Creed, like,
My kid liked that.
returned to faith after seeing that movie, in some way. So I think film is the closest we have. I think what we run up against is, the students that I teach, all this old stuff is not a regular part of their lives. I'm trying to make a case for it, but I realize it's not necessarily what they're going to be looking for. But I also kind of think people should, on the one hand, Christians should make media that reach out to generations wherever they are. Think about the Bible Project videos. Those are really relevant. I think about before he became whatever he is, Rob Bell's new videos, connected with a lot of young people. John Mark Comer is someone whose kind of visuals and materials do this as well. I think in terms of graphic design, I think there are a lot of ways younger generations are reached, but I also think the Orthodox Church is not going around insecurely changing its aesthetics to appeal to younger generations. Nor is generally is the Roman Catholic Church. Although we could talk about Luce, who is a little anime icon the Catholic Church just commissioned. Have you all seen this?
Yes.
Okay, so, and there's been debate about it online. Anyway, so I think there are ways the church should reach out in really relevant ways, and other ways the churches say, we're not going to change, this really rich storehouse of history we have. Come and see, come experience it. I mean, the whole reason those kids were converted by churches is not because the churches are trying to be hip and relevant. They were different. They were weird. And Christianity needs more weirdness, and needs to not be ashamed of its weirdness. Yeah.
Well, so one of the ways is that when the institution of the church tries to be relevant, it always ends up being really cringy and misguided.
Totally.
But when like the sort of the people on the ground, like a movement happens amongst young people that's sort of organic and something that they share culturally, what I'm seeing is AI. I'm seeing young Christians use AI to put Jesus in sort of daily circumstances around them. In the same way that, the votive candles have their kind of campy pictures of Jesus or whatever it is, but that appeals to someone's culture or experience. So the way that young people seem to be doing their iconography amongst themselves is using AI to generate sort of traditional Renaissance pictures of Jesus, but in the sort of daily circumstances with something inspirational or reverse attached, saying, well, he is with me in all things, or I can do all things through Christ. So that movement is happening in some way. It's a little bit cringy and sometimes a little off.
I know, I feel a little pain when I think about
Yes,
AR and being generated.
but that's what's readily available to people who
Yep,
didn't grow
yep.
up with any tactile arts in their education. So that's a way they're expressing, I think, that need. They feel a need to have Christ depicted in some sort of modern setting. And the church hasn't figured out a way to do it well.
Yeah.
So they're just kind of trying to figure out how to do it with AI, and I don't know where it will end up. But that's kind of where it's being experimented with right now.
I saw this really compelling Christmas image several years ago. It was a kind of sort of graphic novel looking illustration of Mary and Joseph in the 21st century, like in the hood. And it reinterprets all the traditional Christian tropes of, say, the flight into Egypt. Because they're in front of a convenience store, and Mary, instead of sitting on a donkey, is sitting on one of those little horses that you put 25 cents in to ride. And it has all of this wonderful, like she's in front of a big sale sticker on this convenience store that kind of becomes a halo around her head. And Joseph looks really nervous, and he's trying to find like a doctor because she's pregnant, and he's on his cell phone. It was just kind of beautiful and sweet and touching, and it wasn't AI. But
Our Christianity Today just came in the mail today, and on it was a city scene with the Holy Family in a tent in the city, envisioning them as modern homeless people, tent dwellers. Yeah.
Wow, that's really.
And a no vacancy sign
Yes.
down, so that is a very modern painting.
Yeah, and you have all sorts of kind of interesting contemporizing interpretations.
I was told something by somebody, when all the Civil War statues, the movement to take them down and all that, and I was, very against that, and I was talking to somebody about it. And she says, well, those statues were not made right after the Civil War. They were financed by, like, KKK people in the 20th century.
No.
And I had not heard that, and I don't know.
You have to kind of go on a statue-by-statue basis on that. I think people make too many kind of broad statements.
And well, her opinion was, well, if they were financed by KKK people, who cares if they got torn down?
Well, then we wouldn't have any of our Roman history, because Rome was defeated and torn to pieces. Well, why would we have any of their art, right?
I'm not saying I agree with her, but that's what she,
Right, but I
that's
mean,
what
that's
she
the
told me.
response, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well,
It doesn't, art is art.
Yeah.
And if it's not, saved, I mean,
Yeah.
the
I know.
message changes. That's the message somebody receives today. 100 years from now, that doesn't have anything to do with it, but they destroy it. We have nothing from the War of Roses, right? There'd be all this
Well, just
medieval
like
art that's gone.
those Buddhist statues in Afghanistan being torn down by the Taliban, it's
Right.
terrible.
I despise modern literature for the most part. I despise modern architecture. I think it's soulless, it's ugly. You look at the new McDonald's they just built. That thing is crappy looking.
Where we have a new McDonald's?
The one over by the mall, it's just a box now. Whereas there's nothing about it that's inviting. The McDonald's in my day, I hate to use McDonald's, but you know, when I was a kid, the McDonald's in my day had the play place out front, so it had something for the kids. It had something for mom and dad. It was an inviting place. Now it looks like a place where like the corporate lawyer's gonna go. I don't wanna be around those people. So I try to expose my kids and I tell them, there are gonna be things in this literature that you're gonna think is inappropriate for today. However, do not judge the past with your modern morality, because 200 years from now, people might be looking back on you like you were the backwards idiot.
Sure.
So, visual arts as well, I think we need to expose our kids as well to that, because of the fact that what's been lost, especially in Christian art, is the beauty. If I had seen if Christianity, I don't take Christianity today because I despise Russell Moore. I think he's anti-biblical in a lot of ways. So, if I had seen that depiction, I would have canceled my subscription, not because I'm so spiritual. I think it degrades the Holy Family. I like the older art, it lifts it up. I want to go to a cathedral not because I want to see the beauty, because it makes me feel small, and it makes God feel huge. I mean, that was the idea behind the medieval cathedrals, wasn't it? To put you in your place. God is vast and enormous, and you are here.
And it
You are
draws,
small. And that God that is that huge gave you that grace that brings you to this place. And I think that's what we're losing. And American culture is just ugly right now. I mean, taking down our past statues as well. So we're losing the beauty of what America was. And I think it's important we hang on to these things. That's why art, to me, is something I try to expose my children. I was lucky when I was a kid because I went to a Christian school. It was a fundamental Baptist Christian school, think of that what you will. We did our national competitions at Bob Jones University in Greenville, South Carolina, and if you remember the George W. Bush election, you remember all the controversy about Bob Jones University. But the one thing they had on campus because of Dr. Bob Jones II was they had a huge collection of Renaissance religious art. And while we were there, we walked through that gallery and it was amazing. And you could get like close enough to touch the paintings and just to see the canvases with all you could see the brush strokes, you could see the texture on the canvas. And that just made such an impression to me. And I've always wanted to take my kids there, but you know, unless you have a reason to be on the BJ campus, you're not getting in. But it made a huge impression on me. And then when I attended Pensacola Christian College, they were starting to collect manuscripts, older manuscripts and things from Christian tradition. So it was, again, a preservation of, because they understood, like C.S. Lewis talks about, we have to preserve the beautiful things. And I don't mean to monopolize this, but I'm just saying that I think that's what we're losing. And so that's why I think art has become so important. And as I get older, or maybe it's just a fact of getting older, I just think that I want to look back a little bit more than looking forward. I mean,
Dan, do you wanna give any final thoughts on that, or anything else?
Yeah,
I wanna be respectful of people's time and
yeah, just
wrap it up
kind of
soon.
response to that. One of the things I try to tell my students is that Christianity has a really impressive cultural architecture built up over the centuries behind it. And all of this stuff is a part of that. It's the most, in my opinion, the most thought over and poked and prodded religion ever. But and it has been tested, and it has produced in its wake some of the most amazing just cultural artifacts. And before you ditch Christianity, think about everything you're ditching, you know, because it's, I mean, non-Christians can appreciate this work too, but something that has a gravity to it. The Christian faith has a gravity that has drawn people in for 2,000 years, and has also created all these ripple effects in culture. And I think it's a check mark in all this stuff's a check mark on the scales of Christianity. Just the fact that it's made so much beauty, I think is worth considering.
Well, thank you, Dan.
Sure.
Appreciate it. And hope you all enjoyed that, and you certainly did a great job of showing us a lot of art.
I'm sorry it was so much.
No,
Like, super luxury.
It was great.
I like the Niagara Falls paintings.
This was the tour de force of visual arts in the Christian life, and so you've given us a lot to think about, and I appreciate that. But I think he's serious when he says if you want to email him and get some recommendations of books and artwork, I think you'll respond. So,
Totally. Yeah.
If you want that, talk to Dan and get his address. But yeah, we appreciate it. So thank you all for coming and participating in this. Next month is going to be Christianity and music, and Cole Bennett has agreed to talk about that. You all probably know who Cole is, or you've seen Cole. Maybe what you don't know about Cole is that he actually is in a band, I guess they would call it a band, right?
He's in a band.
He's in a band. He's in a folk band. He writes music, he writes songs, and so I think he'll bring a kind of interesting perspective on music in the Christian life. Of course, there's 100 different ways you can go with music in the Christian life, right? But he's going to bring kind of his own unique angle on that. So stay tuned. I haven't figured out the date because he's got some things that we need to work around. And I don't know what the venue is. He specifically said he does not want to do it at Sway Bar because the lobby is too noisy, and he wants to do some things that require a little more listening. And so I don't know where we'll be. We may be back here. We may try a different venue downtown. So stay tuned for where. But that will be
Would you ever want to meet at somebody's house?
possibly. I'm open to different ideas.
It's nice that we can do prayer right before though.
That
Yeah,
is
good.
nice that we can do evening prayer and then do.
Not
Anyway.
that we could do that at someone's house, I guess, too.
That's true.
Yeah.
So stay tuned. It'll be the second or third Thursday of December, and venue is to be determined. So keep your eye on the email. So, but thank you all. There's probably some more drinks there if you'd like. Talk to Dan if you want. And again, Dan, we appreciate it. This was great.
Thank you, Dan,
I just-
appreciate it.
I just got back from Savannah last week,
Oh yeah.
and I got to go tour a Jewish synagogue that was